more resources, visit rym.org.
One, two, 3.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Talking to Cameron Cole again today, talking about his book, Therefore I Have Hope. And yesterday, Cameron, we talked a little bit about some of the truths that you discuss in your book. And so what I would like to ask you today is just what are the 3 ways you would encourage parents, as well as youth workers to prepare both themselves and their children for suffering? Because we know we live in a fallen world. There is pain and there is affliction, everywhere. And so there's no way we can avoid it. It's only a matter of time before we're experiencing some form of affliction. So what are those maybe 3 ways, could be more, that you would encourage parents and youth workers to prepare themselves and their children for suffering? And I know this is something you kind of referenced a couple of days ago, but what would you have for us?
Yeah, okay. So great question. And I really, I think part of my story and part of what's behind in the book, Therefore Have Hope, is this sense of gratitude. I feel like God really prepared me to have hope and to survive after my son died. And so I think about this a lot. And so 3 things I would say. First, I think we need to be really honest with kids about just realistic expectations of the Christian life. I think a lot of times we can sell kids, or at least kids can hear, that because I'm a Christian, nothing bad is going to happen to me and life's going to be more comfortable and it's going to be a lot easier. When in reality, Jesus is super honest about how hard life is for the believer. And he says, in this life you'll have trial and tribulation. And he's not pulling punches. And honestly, John, if you look at a lot of the books of the New Testament in particular, so many of them are ministering to and speaking to people who are suffering and, helping them. It's giving them direction and theological guidance in how to persevere. And so, the first thing I would say is, kids need a narrative of existence that is really honest about suffering and how difficult life is going to be, so that kids aren't shocked when it happens. I think I talk about going from O crud to no crud. AA, they see it in a different way in AA, but that's an AA maxim. And it's basically, when kids are kind of have been told that life is going to be hard and that there are going to be tragedies and difficulties, and that God doesn't insulate them from that. When it happens, it's not an oh crud. They're so stunned and so disillusioned and disenchanted with God, but no crud. Yeah, I've been told this is going to happen. I think that's one thing. A second thing, I think it's really important for kids to have a well-grounded biblical apologetic for why they believe in Jesus. The first thing I said after Cam died, as I said, a few days ago in this podcast, was that Jesus rose from the dead, and that means that God is good. And so, for me, I kind of build my personal apologetic about why I believe and follow Jesus based on the resurrection. I kind of know that God validates, and in fact, all the claims that Jesus makes that he's God, that he's the Messiah, that they're true. And it, validates that the whole biblical narrative is true, and all the promises of the gospel are true. And so, and on top of that, I have and had, and I write about this in Therefore I Have Hope, off the top of my head, a good explanation for why I believe the resurrection is true. And so, I think a lot of times we think of apologetics as purely like winning an argument with the, kids can think of it as winning their argument with their friend who takes debate and loves to read all the neo-atheism drivel that's on the internet. And no, it's not just for winning arguments, or it's not just being prepared for college philosophy class. Like, it's also so that when you encounter tragedy, you have intellectual tools to help you remember oh yeah, God's good. Oh yeah, God's with me. Oh yeah, God has purposes in what's going on. And then, last thing, John, I think I would say is, and I don't mean this in a way where we're either voyeurs or where we're taking advantage of other people's misery, but I work in an environment where my kids are suburban and they're insulated from a lot of life's problems. And so I think this part of the value of mercy ministry and doing relational ministry of the poor is actually really helpful. Because, having kids be involved in mission trips and service opportunities where they are actually hearing the stories of people who are suffering mightily, whether that's in poverty or they're victims of injustice or they struggle with addiction. And, it's a way that kids, in a way that dignifies and honors poor people or people who are oppressed, where they can kind of enter into suffering and they can start to process it before it becomes their own suffering, if that makes sense. So I think that's that's one way that God uses the poor and oppressed to minister to younger people through their stories.
Yeah. And really, there's so much, like you said, many of our students can be insulated from so much, pain and suffering. And really it can confront us just that we often make an idol out of comfort, that we often, seek comfort. And we know that ultimately, we were created for a life of perfection, in the garden. And so as sin came into this earth, we interact with sin, and when we interact with brokenness or see brokenness, it rubs up against that, creational good that we were, created for. Sin and suffering, all of that is foreign to us. And so that can definitely, that can be an understandable way in which we recoil from that. But the importance, like you said, of entering into brokenness, of being in, people's lives. And like you said, not from a voyeuristic point of view, but yeah, moving towards those who suffer, I think is helpful. And then just like you said, the honesty about the Christian life, that I think that is crucial, because there's so much, and we know, the prosperity gospel is so prominent. And we actually said this on this very podcast not too long ago, that sometimes in our circles, we can just kind of roll our eyes at the prosperity gospel, and we know it's false. It's a false gospel. But there are millions and millions who buy into that false gospel. And so, we've got to be, pushing back on that with our students and educating them that, where the prosperity gospel gets it right is that, they're talking about promises that will one day be realized, but trying to, have those on this earth. But while you follow Christ, we can definitely expect suffering to take place. So again, very helpful. Cameron, anything else you want to add as we close this out?
No, I think I will say one thing is, we want to prepare kids, we want to prepare ourselves, but I think one thing I'd say is true in my story is that God was the one preparing me. No one had a master plan for me, in terms of preparing me to suffer, but God sure did, and I can look back honestly at breakups, in college and in high school. They seem so trivial, and we can really marginalize that kind of stuff in kids' lives. Just like,
sure,
kind of roll our eyes about, please, wait till you get in the real world. But man, that stuff was instrumental. Like, God used that to prepare me for my son's death, and so we too should, honor the pain and the disappointments of kids, even if it seems silly and childish to us at the time. And we kind of look back and like, oh gosh, how could I ever have gotten so upset about that? But it's real. It's real. It's something that God used to prepare me. So I would really encourage people to trust in the Lord as the one who ultimately is going to prepare us.
Yeah, that's very good, Cameron. I'm really glad you're bringing that up, because we can just tell students to shake it off. Oh, it's no big deal. If you think that's suffering, that's nothing compared to this. But to see that, especially as they're, if this is a middle school student you're talking to or a high schooler, as they still are young and processing this hurt, that's real hurt to them at this season and time in their life. And so encouraging us to be sensitive to them in the midst of that. I think that's some very good advice, very helpful perspective. So thanks again, Cameron. Tomorrow we will be closing out our conversation with Cameron and looking at how this tragedy has changed his perspective in parenting. So be sure and tune in more tomorrow. Thanks again, Cameron.
Thank you, John. Look forward to it.